Hi there. All on the Ulvestad, we'll run through some of the basic ideas and traps in the Ulvestad variation of the two knights defense. e4 and e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the two knights defense with knight f6. We're looking at the knight g5 line hitting f7, and black will defend with d5. So d5 and white takes on d5, and here we could expect maybe the Chigorin line with knight a5, which is classed as the main line, or the Fritz variation with knight d4, or can try this, the Ulvestad variation with b5. So let's first of all examine white's options in this quite interesting position. The main line we're going to be looking at is bishop takes on b5. Perhaps not the main line, but that's the one we'll be following. But let's explore d takes on c6. Then black's going to be doing okay after b takes on c4, getting the bishop pair. And if queen e2, then queen d5 keeps the pawn on e5 covered. f4 can be met by e4, and if knight c3 hitting the queen takes the pawn on c6. Here black's doing okay. We can expect some swaps. Knight g takes on e4, knight takes on e4, queen takes on e4, queen takes on e4, knight takes on e4. White retains the extra pawn, but more initiative for black after bishop f5, hitting the knight. d3 defends the knight and doesn't allow that c2 pawn to be captured after running with the knight. c takes on d3, c takes on d3. Long castles will give black certainly adequate compensation for the pawn, and here I would actually prefer black's position. So going back to the move b5 in the Ulvestad, we can look at the retreat, bishop back to f1, and now black can capture the pawn on d5 either with a knight or with the queen. If queen takes on d5, then knight c3, more or less equal I believe here. And if knight takes on d5, then now the bishop can come back and capture on b5. The reason the bishop was perhaps on f1 was when the queen captured on d5, the bishop on f1 keeps control of the loose pawn on g2. So in this position, with the knight captures and bishop takes on b5, active play for both sides, perhaps more or less equal again. Black could consider though it's jumping. Instead of queen takes on d5, knight to d4, and here this transposes into the Fritz variation of the two knights, which I particularly like myself. A bad try for black would be this move h6 here, counter hitting, because here white will get a big advantage after knight takes f7, king takes f7, and now d takes on c6, bishop c5, knight c3, maybe not knight c3, but yeah, knight c3 looks okay. White is doing better in this variation. So as we go back to the Ulvestad signature move of b5, we're looking at this line now, bishop takes on b5. Black can consider knight takes on d5, which hits the knight on g5, but in so doing will give up the knight on c6. So more solid is queen takes on d5, defending the knight on c6, hitting the bishop on b5 while keeping an eye on the pawn on g2. Now if bishop takes on c6, then queen takes on c6, and the pawn on g2 must be dealt with. Let's have a look first at queen f3. If queen f3, then black avoids trading queens. e4 gains time on the queen. The queen moves over to b3, hitting f7, which interestingly enough here isn't too much of a threat, because bishop c5 allows queen takes f7, and if king d8, black's pieces are far more active. If knight c3, rook f8 hits the queen. Queen takes on g7 allows rook g8, hitting the queen again. And if the queen moves to h6, then we have a nice little tactical shot. Bishop takes f2 check, because if king takes f2, black picks up the queen with the nifty fork on g4, knight g4, which hits the queen as well with check. So instead of queen f3, what happens after castles? Well, black will develop the bishop to b7, immediately threatening queen takes on g2, checkmate. Well, look here, knight f3 could be met by the aggressive g5, trying to drive the knight away to loosen up the g2 square, and h3 can be met by h5 with a big initiative for black. Again, after bishop b7, if f3 was played, then we can expect bishop c5 check, king h1, again initiative for black. So queen f3 seems the most logical, but black will again proceed with e4, hitting the queen, queen b3 and long castles, allowing knight takes on f7, forking the two rooks. But black doesn't concern himself with that, because e3 opens up the diagonal and queen takes on g2 is threatening mate. So if f3 is played, e2 hitting the rook, rook e1 and bishop c5 check sends the king to h1, rook d to e8 allows the capture of his fellow rook on h8, but that's of no consequence, because after knight takes on h8, knight g4 threatens knight f2, which appears to be like a mating attack, and if f takes on g4, then the diagonal is opened and queen takes on g2 would be mate. So this has been a little bit long-winded, a bit longer than usual, but it's covered most of the basic ideas of the Ulvestad variation of the two-knight defense. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.